So late last night, we received the news that Christian McCaffrey has been traded to the San Francisco 49ers in exchange for a 23-second, 3rd, and 4th round pick and a 2024 5th round pick. So let's break this down for fantasy, both rest of season for redraft and then obviously for Dynasty because Dynasty. So on the Panthers side of this, it's actually pretty easy. The rebuild is on and this team is just playing for the 1.01, which they currently have right now if the season were to end today. The Christian McCaffrey role that he's leaving behind is probably going to be broken up into a committee between Chuba Hubbard and Deonta Foreman, which likely makes both of them fantasy RB3s at best for the rest of the year. And I'm not really excited to start either one really throughout the year, let alone this week in particular. McCaffrey is leaving behind an average of 14 carries and 7 targets per game though, which is honestly a big enough pie for both of them to feed off of. But since they're splitting that work, and this is the Carolina Panthers offense, it's only going to get worse, and it's just really not super enticing for either one of them as long as they're both healthy. Of the two, I do prefer Deonta Foreman though, as I do think that he gets the most raw touches per game every single week. So it's just kind of a volume play there, like a Brian Robinson or Ezekiel Elliott at best right now for fantasy. Final thing though, I will say I think a dark horse winner from this trade from a dynasty standpoint could actually be DJ Moore for one of two reasons. One, they continued their yard sale and they actually trade him. Kansas City, please, Kansas City. But that does seem unlikely, and they've actually come out and they've said that they view him as a cornerstone piece on their team. But then perhaps two, since they already have the 1.01 right now and the CMC trade really just helps solidify them getting the 1.01, if the Panthers were to draft either CJ Stroud or Bryce Young, that's a massive win for DJ Moore, as either quarterback would undoubtedly be the best quarterback that he's played with in his entire career, even back in college. Or maybe the Panthers, they just really stick it to us fantasy players and they just draft Will Anderson and they sign Mason Rudolph or something as some sick, cruel joke. That could be possible as well. But moving over to the Niners side of this deal, just from an NFL standpoint, I really don't get this trade at all. I mean, if there has ever been anyone to have proven that running backs don't matter in their offensive system, it's Kyle Shanahan, and yet no other coach in the league has invested more draft capital into the position than Kyle Shanahan. I mean, I get that he's wanted a guy in San Francisco since Carlos Hyde left, but I'd say he's been pretty successful without just one guy and just throwing in whoever happens to be on the sidelines that week. But whatever, we're here right now, so let's just dive into what this does for CMC. On the surface, this feels like an upgrade for Christian McCaffrey, right? But I don't really think it is. I just think it's much more lateral for him from a fantasy standpoint. McCaffrey has made his name on essentially one thing in his entire NFL career for fantasy, and that's catching the ball, and catching the ball way more than anybody else in the league. That's what made him so insanely valuable for fantasy, was that he was getting 120 plus up to 140 targets in a single season. That's more than most wide receivers. But now you put him on a team that since 2019 has averaged 6.5 targets per game to the entire running back position, which is less than what CMC was already getting by himself in Carolina this season. I don't know if I necessarily see that same volume translating over to San Francisco. Now, I get it. You planned your offense around the personnel that you have, and we actually had this exact same argument when McCaffrey was drafted, because Cam Newton up to that point didn't throw to the running backs and then look to see how that one turned out. But my fear here is that from a receiving standpoint, this is a team where we can't even get consistent targets for Brandon Ayuk and George Kittle, but we should be expecting consistent targets for Christian McCaffrey. I'm not entirely buying into that. So what I think this does is it actually lowers CMC floor on a weekly basis, because his receiving output is going to drop a little bit. But if there's one thing that Kyle Shanahan knows how to do, it's run the ball. And Christian McCaffrey is going to greatly benefit from that fact. CMC was already talented enough to be able to run for 70, 80, 90 plus yards on under 15 carries, even on a horrible Panthers team. But you now put him behind an actual good run blocking offense on an actually good team with good offensive scheming. That's the money right there. Prior to last week's debacle in Atlanta, Jeff Wilson had 4 straight games of 74 yards or more. Wilson also has 9 total rush attempts inside the 10 on the season. To date, Christian McCaffrey has one all year. 1 carry inside the 10-yard line. That's the difference between Carolina and San Francisco for Christian McCaffrey, is that there's going to be greater rushing efficiency for an already efficient running back, and way more scoring opportunities. So, well, yeah, maybe this does hurt his receiving a little bit, like I just mentioned, but that should be made up for by better rushing efficiency and probably way more touchdown opportunities than what he was getting in Carolina. So as long as he stays healthy, and I get it's kind of funny that perhaps the most injury-prone running back from the last 2 years now joins the most injury-prone team for the past however many years, but as long as he stays healthy, Christian McCaffrey is still an RB1 and honestly more likely still a top 5 fantasy running back. I don't think this impacts Debo, and it shouldn't really affect Ayuk and Kittle outside of maybe just more of an emphasis on the running game takes away massive volume opportunities for them on a weekly basis, and they have to rely more on efficiency, but they're just honestly doing that anyway. I'm sad for Elijah Mitchell, obviously, because he was my dude, but he's a great handcuff now, and maybe he gets traded down the line and ends up being a starter for some other team because they have Christian McCaffrey. But, oh, speaking of trades, the Rams were reportedly in on Christian McCaffrey as well with the whole like Akers thing that's going on. So if I may, I would suggest LA call Washington and trade for Antonio Gibson. I think that would be really, really fun for everybody involved. Just saying. Oh, and speaking of even more trades, but trades that you can actually make, I highly recommend checking out these 3 trade targets from Justin in this video right up here.